12 o'clock. This is Radio Noon. My name's Sean Appel. And again, in a couple of minutes, we're going to get to our phone-in question for the day. And I realize it's a sensitive one because we're asking basically today, not about the cleanup and not necessarily about the damage from this flooding, but we're sort of asking a bigger picture question. What do we do now? Do we allow building in those areas? Do we allow rebuilding in those areas? Also like to hear from you on if you were in one of those affected areas and let's say you had to leave your home because of the flooding, what would you do? How would it hit you personally? Would you want to go back to that area? Would you want to live somewhere else? So there's lots to talk about. We're going to get to all that in a couple of seconds. I'll give you the phone number again right now if you want to talk about that. And if you want to grab a line, it's 514-597-4500 or toll free. It's 1-877-597-4500. The text line 514-566-9066. Right now, do want to head back to Pierrefonds, check in on the latest there. And our CBC colleague, Kate McKenna, is there, joins me on the line. Hi, Kate.
Hey, Sean.
Where are you exactly, Kate?
I am on the corner of Deauville and Gouin, which is where the biggest military operation so far to deal with the flooding is about to start at 1 o'clock now. So I'm actually kind of surrounded by tanks at the moment. There are about 6 tanks in front of me and then 3 behind me. So they're in preparation for 400 soldiers to come here to work to fortify and rebuild a dam that gave way last weekend next to the water processing plant. So that's the latest. We are anticipating that to take about 24 hours and will be a big step in getting rid of some of the water that's on the ground here, Sean.
And then what would we anticipate after that?
Well, so what they're planning on doing is taking water that's on the street and then pumping it back into the river. So that's step one. And then once that happens, there are still roads that are closed, like a big chunk of Pierrefonds Boulevard is closed. And then, of course, after that, I guess the last step is getting people back into their homes. Now, we just had an update from the city not that long ago, about an hour ago, who said that there is no date on when they're hoping to get the people who have been evacuated from their homes back inside. In fact, they're warning people who might hear on the radio, for instance, that water levels are receding. They're warning them not to do that because it could possibly be dangerous because of electricity and that sort of thing. So still not firm in terms of concrete plans not concrete plans, but concrete times and when this situation is going to improve. Still a lot of police here. We heard from the city that the police are here both to direct traffic, deal with road closures, but also to prevent any looting that might happen while people are out of their homes. So still very much a situation here in Pierrefonds, Sean.
Now, have you been speaking to people who are waiting for that moment, waiting to get the all clear so that they can go back?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And some of them just really aren't sure what's going to happen. Now, the Red Cross puts you up for 3 nights in hotels. After that, you're kind of not necessarily on your own, but you don't have that support there anymore. So people who have been trying to get back to their places, people who have been by to visit and see that water levels are receding, but nobody that I've spoken to has said, I'll do what I want. I'm not going to listen to the firefighters. They have been listening to the firefighters, and they are finding, aunts, uncles. We've heard a lot of people on the West Island taking people in. They're going that route instead of just, doing whatever they want to do and going back into their homes.
Kate, thanks so much.
Thank you.
CBC's Kate McKenna. She's in Pierrefonds, one of the areas that I think by now has been pretty badly hit by these floods. On our program, from here on in, for the rest of the program today, we're going to say, well, what do we do now? Beyond sort of the cleanup here, what do we do? Should we allow building? Should we allow rebuilding? Should those people go back to their homes? Is that a good idea? Should there be other homes built there? How do we handle this situation? The phone number again, 514-597-4500. Toll free, it's 1-877-597-4500 from anywhere in the province. By the way, as Kate sort of zeroes in on the situation in Pierrefonds, the latest numbers today, about 4,000 homes have been flooded across Quebec. The Public Security Minister, Martin Coiteux, was talking today in Trois-Rivières. He says the province is handing out about $400,000 a day in relief money and compensation money, and he expects that to continue at that pace for some time. We are going to look at, well, what should we be doing after that? My guest for the rest of the hour is going to be Glenn McGillivray. I just want to read to you something that he wrote that appeared in the Globe and Mail a few days ago. That's where I saw it. And he writes, once again, homes located alongside a Canadian river have flooded. Affected homeowners are shocked. The local government is wringing its hands. The respective provincial government is ramping up to provide taxpayer-funded disaster assistance, and the feds are deploying the armed forces. In Canada, it's the plot of the movie Groundhog Day, or the definition of insanity attributed to Albert Einstein, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. At least in the movie, Bill Murray's character learns from his mistakes. This can't seem to be said of how we manage floods in this country. So, our question here, what should we be doing? Should we be rebuilding in those areas, building in those areas? What do you think? 514-597-4500, toll free, it's 1-877-597-4500. As I said, my guest is Glenn McGillivray. He's the managing director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, and he joins me on the line. Glenn McGillivray, hi there, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Can you explain first, because people will be wondering from the title, I mean, I want to ask you about that column I was just reading from, but what's the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction?
Well, we've been around for 20 years now. This year's our 20th year. We were created by the Canadian property and casualty insurance industry to address the trend toward more and larger natural disasters. So our goal is to build resilient communities so that people aren't hurt, aren't killed, and their property isn't damaged from natural hazards in Canada.
And you write a column saying that we as a country, we are not learning from our mistakes when it comes to how we manage flooding in this country. What do you mean?
There's a cycle here where we build. There's a flood or something, some other type of hazard comes. We clean up after it. We rebuild. We put everything back the way it was. And then the flood comes again. And we go through the whole cycle again and again. And really who's holding the bag here is not government. That's a fallacy. It's the taxpayer. And so, I mean, there's a lot of taxpayer money that's going to be flooding into Ottawa, Gatineau, Montreal, places like that over the next while to pay for the armed forces, to pay for disaster assistance. There's going to be interruptions in the economy that we all pay for, et cetera, et cetera. And this all comes out of taxpayer money. And I actually saw a piece in Maclean's over the last day or two which says, I'm tired of paying for your river view. And it's a little glib and a little, I hate to sound really cold here because my heart goes out to people, but there is this chain of events and we have to break the chain. We have to do something differently here.
Before I get back to that, because I want to ask, obviously, well, how do we do that? How do we break the chain? I just sort of want to address the obvious issue here. And you talk about that, not wanting to appear glib. There will surely be people who will listen to you, listen to me talking about this right now, and they will think to themselves, or they will scream at their radios, how can you be talking about this right now when there are basements that have, a meter of water in them still? And I wonder how you would respond to people who say, well, how can you do this now?
Yeah, my heart goes out to these people. It really, really does. I have no idea what it would be like to lose my home and my possessions, and I hope all the best for the folks out there. But there are going to be some big decisions that are going to have to be made over the next little while, and there's not a lot of time here. The water's going to recede. It's receding already. And some choices are going to have to be made about reconstruction, cleanup, mitigation in the future, infrastructure, all sorts of big, costly decisions that will dictate whether we go through this again in a few years or whether we can prevent it.
Okay, so if we want to...
It's a good time to talk about that,
Yeah, you're saying never a good time, but we might as well have that discussion.
Right.
Okay, so what do we do? How do we break the chain?
Well, what we often say here at the Institute is you can't stop the earthquake or the wind from blowing or the rain from falling. But, we have this perception that a natural disaster is actually the hazard. It's not the hazard. It's the hazard intersecting with our built environment, our communities. And so if we can prevent that hazard from affecting our communities, we can prevent the disaster. So in this case, it basically means not building in the immediate floodway and floodplain. And we know that we've known it for a long time. We have been using land use planning to manage flood for 60 or 70 years now. This is not a new thing. And really, land use planning is the number one tool to use against flood and to mitigate against flood. We know where the floodplains are. We know what happens when it rains too much or the snow melts quickly or whatever. We get floods every spring in Canada. This is very common.
Okay, so let me just ask you a couple more questions before we head to our phone lines, because I guess there's a couple of different categories, at least in my mind, right? I mean, you have the one question of, if we know where these floodplains are, should we allow development there from here on in? Should we allow new homes, new buildings there? What's the answer there?
The answer is no, at least not in the immediate floodway and floodplain. These types of policies differ across Canada, but in Ontario, we do not allow construction in the floodplain period, and that goes right on up to the 250-year floodplain. So that's a probability, and I don't want to get into the technical details of that. But we just do not allow construction in that floodplain in Ontario. In Saskatchewan, they don't allow construction in the 1 in 500-year floodway. So this is all probability, but we just do not let it happen.
Now, let me ask you the more complicated question here. There are lots of homes that are flooded that have been there for a few years, in some cases for decades. That is, I think, a much thornier issue. What do we do in those cases with people who have been flooded in homes that have been there for a while?
Well, I think what we need to do is look at the immediate floodway and floodplain. So that is the floodway and floodplain that floods the most commonly. This is the place where you don't need a real deluge to flood. It floods fairly regularly, and I think we have to really seriously think about buying these people out. It happens in certain places in the world. The U.S., they buy out people in the floodplain. It's voluntary, mind you, but these things do happen, and I think we really have to think seriously about that. Now, if you get into, say, a major downtown area of an older part of a city, it gets really thorny. I mean, what are you going to do? Move an entire downtown of a city? And that's where grudgingly mitigation comes into play. So, anti-flood infrastructure and that sort of thing.
Okay, but so you're saying when feasible, and maybe not in those downtown areas, buying people out might just be the smartest thing to do.
I think so.
Okay.
And
let's stop there for now, because we're getting lots of calls. I want to go to the phone lines here. I'm speaking with Glenn McGillivray. He's the managing director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. What do you think of what he is saying? The phone number here, 514-597-4500, or toll free, it's 1-877-597-4500. And we'll go to the calls. Let's speak with Gilles, who is calling from Montreal. Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
Quite well. How are you?
Very good, thank you. I'd like to say that my heart goes out to all those that are affected. It's really, I wouldn't want to live through that myself. My opinion in all of this is, I don't know, the city is 375 years. Somebody should know that water rises over the past, years. I think they should leave green spaces pretty much around everywhere, be it the lakes and rivers, so that people can enjoy them and not just a certain few. Eventually, people tend to buy the land there. They want to be as close as possible to the water, and unfortunately, this has happened.
So I guess my question to you then would be the same question that I was asking Glenn McGillivray a couple of seconds ago, because it sounds like you are also saying, well, do not build there from here on in, but what do we do with the people who have already?
Well, eventually, I think we have to bite the bullet, and some people will have to either raise their grounds so their houses are a little higher up on stilts, so to speak, something like down in Florida, and it goes the same for houses that are on edges of cliffs. If the soil is not on hard rock, you wouldn't want to be there.
Yes, that's for sure. That makes a lot of sense. Listen, Joel, thanks so much for the call.
Well, thank you.
That's Joe calling from Montreal. The phone number again is 514-597-4500. Toll free, it's 1-877-597-4500. The text line here is 514-566-9066. And Twitter is at CBC Radio Noon, where I've also tweeted out what Glenn McGillivray wrote. I saw it in the Globe Mail, so I tweeted it out from there. Glenn McGillivray, our last caller there, saying, well, you can go another way with mitigation. You could put everything on stilts, but I mean, I guess there's only so much you can do in a situation like that, right?
Yeah, there's only so much you can do, and one thing we have to remember is that not only is property damaged during floods, but lives get lost. And so when you are in that immediate floodplain area, the flood fringe or floodway area, we're very uncomfortable at the Institute saying, oh, I'll just make your home more fortified. That makes us a little nervous because of the issue of loss of life and that sort of thing. So I hear what he's saying, and in some places in the world they do these sorts of things. New Orleans, for example, coastline in Florida, for example. But we have to think also of protection of human life as well.
And again, you were saying the best way to do that, really the only way to ensure that, is to move people out of harm's way.
Right. I mean, this is kind of basic risk management. One of the best ways to avoid risk, and this means any risk at all, is just to avoid it completely. That's completely effective. As soon as you avoid a risk, you are 100% risk-free. And so I think we have to look at this from a risk management perspective and get people out of there.
Let's talk about buyouts for another second. We're going to talk coming up later in the program about somebody who was bought out of a house in Sydney, Nova Scotia, after some flooding there. But generally speaking, what's the model that we should follow, that governments should follow, if you want to buy someone out? How much would you figure? How do you figure out how much to give those people? Do you make it mandatory? Do you make it voluntary? What makes sense?
Well, I think, first of all, mandatory programs work best. There was a voluntary program put into place in southern Alberta after the 2013 floods, and many believe that it failed quite miserably. Only about, say, a quarter of the people that were offered the deal took the government up on it. And it doesn't work when that happens. When you have, say, every fourth house removed, you still have the rest of the homes there. And so that was considered to be a failure. So mandatory programs work best.
And how much money do you give the people?
Yeah, well, it's not too difficult. I mean, you look at the pre-flood market value of a home, and so we have the ability to go and evaluate what a home was worth and give the pre-disaster value of that home to the homeowner. And if you like, you can help them out with moving expenses, other things like that. But determining what the home is valued at is not too difficult.
Okay. We'll get back to our phone calls here and then back to more discussion with Glenn McGillivray. He's the Managing Director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. Right now, let's say hello to Andre, who's calling from Montreal. Hi, Andre.
Hi, how are you?
I'm all right. What do you think?
Well, I think that to relocate family from the place where I used to live and from the houses that suffered from this flood and the damage, it will cost much more to repair the house, because imagine house has to be completely demolished, area has to be cleaned. Contrary to my own case, when my foundation gave in, it would cost much less if I have a permit to rebuild. First, because I already looked up for information how much would it cost, and to rebuild my foundation out of real concrete would cost me something like $25, $30, maybe max $40,000, instead of giving me a lump sum and sending me to some other place, and this sum wouldn't even cover up all my expenses. And first thing is that houses that suffered most of the damage were built a long time ago on foundations made of cement blocks, which is right now forbidden to use in inundation areas.
Okay.
So right now houses in the same place should be foundation should be rebuilt either out of the pure concrete with iron mesh, or on the pylons.
So, Andre, I'm understanding, first of all, that you obviously your house suffered some damage here.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so I'm really sorry to hear that. You are saying cheaper to rebuild where you are than to go somewhere else, right?
Absolutely. And another thing, talking about the control of the flood, it's like I said to your producer, I am from former Soviet Union, and I'm from family of hydro engineers, power engineers. My father was he was a general manager of one of the power complexes, like many stations providing electricity. And to avoid floods in our area, those stations were working in coordination with thermal stations, which burn oil, mazout, or coal to produce electricity, and nuclear energy. So let's say then they all year round, except following.
Andre, I got to jump in because we're just at about 12:30 and we have to take a little break here. But I'll tell you what, I definitely want Glenn McGillivray to address what you were saying. So why don't you hang around as well, and we'll come back to you and to the points that you're making in about 90 seconds. Right now, 12:30, and Joanne Bailey is here from the CBC Montreal newsroom with your news headlines and your forecast. Joanne.
Water levels are receding slowly in many parts of the province, but the region of Mauricie is on high alert. More rain is in the forecast there. And in Pierrefonds, the armed forces are out in force. They're about to embark on one of their biggest operations so far. They are trying to reinforce a dike there. In the weather forecast for Montreal, it is 9 degrees, mainly cloudy. We're expecting a high of 13. Overnight, still cloud, a low of 8. And tomorrow in Montreal, cloudy still with a high of 17. Eastern townships, mainly cloudy today. Some isolated showers, a high of 12. Overnight, mainly cloudy, a low of 4. And tomorrow in the townships, cloudy still with a high of 15. Quebec City, cloudy today, some isolated showers. Strong winds from the northeast, a high of 10. Overnight, mainly cloudy, a low of 7. And tomorrow in Quebec City, still cloudy, light winds from the northeast, and a high tomorrow of 13. Finally, in the Gaspé, periods of rain or drizzle ending this afternoon, then cloudy with a high of 8. Overnight, still some clouds, still some periods of drizzle with a low of 2. And tomorrow in the Gaspé, it should clear. The fog patches should dissipate in the morning, and a high tomorrow of 8 degrees. Now back to Radio Noon.
Thanks very much, Joanne Bailey. My name is Sean Appel, and we are talking today about maybe not what to do later today, but what to do soon and how to handle these floodplains and what kind of development there should be on them, what kind of redevelopment, should people go back to their houses there. My guest is Glenn McGillivray, who's the managing director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. And just before our break, we were talking with Andre, and Glenn McGillivray. Andre was saying he has sustained some pretty serious damage, but he says it's cheaper to rebuild where he is than to go anywhere else. He also was saying that he thought that flooding could be prevented or mitigated if there was better handling of waterways and dams. But on his first point of cheaper to stay, how do you respond to that?
Well, I think it's important to look at the big picture. You can't just look at the cost of repair versus the cost of moving. You have to look at all expenses. So first of all, we're sending the armed forces in. That's not free. We tend to think of government expenses as being costless, but they cost each and every one of us money. You have to look at the cost of things like of the infrastructure you talked about. So, we can just fix up the place and put everything back the way it was. But my point and the whole point of our discussion today is, does that make any sense? And so, I say, no, it doesn't make any sense. But if you want to talk about infrastructure, the cost of proper flood mitigation infrastructure can be massive. We can be talking about billions of dollars here, most certainly hundreds of millions. So it's important to look at all costs, including societal costs and interruption to economies and things of that nature, the cost of law enforcement. Everybody in the affected areas, all government officials are on overtime right now. You add up all those expenses, you're looking at a lot of money.
All right, Glenn McGillivray, thanks for that answer. Andre, thanks for the call. The phone number is 514-597-4500. Toll free, it's 1-877-597-4500. The text line is 514-566-9066. Let's head back to the phone lines. Let's go to Hampstead, and Joseph's on the line. Hi, Joseph.
Hello. I have a question for Glenn. Wouldn't floodgates and the dredging of the rivers and lakes in certain areas, wouldn't that be the answer, Glenn? And tell me why not.
Sorry, how do you mean?
Floodgates, dredging of the river, at least another 2 feet or so, wouldn't that be part of the answer to the problem?
So to lower all the rivers by 2 feet?
Yes.
I know nothing about hydrology. I can't imagine the task that would be. I don't know. Glenn, would you know anything about it?
Again, you're talking about, hundreds of millions of dollars and sometimes billions. The first thing, the most important thing to remember about flood mitigation is putting in dams and levees and dikes and gates and things of that nature. You're still on the floodplain. That hasn't changed one iota. There is still that floodplain there. That floodplain does not disappear. Now, we've learned sometimes the hard way that we can't engineer ourselves out of every problem. And there is a big move on all over the world to kind of return things back to nature, because nature was always the best at managing flood. And man has tried in many, many instances to try to engineer their way out of various problems and has failed. Now, we get, of course, certain successes. Of course, the floodway around Winnipeg was very successful. If we were to build something of that nature, we'd be talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars. When that was first built, it cost $60 million, and that was way back in the day. But that sort of infrastructure is very, very costly. And you can't just dredge once. If you're going to dredge, you're going to have to do it regularly. The disruption to people in the communities where dredging and things of that occur is huge. You need land, first of all, when you're putting big infrastructure projects in. So there has to be appropriation or expropriation there and things of that nature. So just like what I said a few minutes ago, you got to look at the overall cost, the big picture of all this stuff. You compare it against buyouts and returning things back to the natural state, and in most cases, returning things back to the natural state is far cheaper in the long run than anything else we can think of.
That's Glenn McGillivray. He's the managing director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. Glenn McGillivray, before I speak with my next guest, just a fast question here. How much do most Canadians know about where these flood plains or flood zones are?
Well, we have pretty good understanding of them. We have a lot of history. One of the issues we do have, though, is flood maps tend to be quite dated in Canada. There's a real mishmash or a dog's breakfast out there. Some places have very modern flood maps using very modern techniques. Some places have incorporated climate change into their flood maps, like Newfoundland. So very, very forward thinking. Other communities have very old flood maps. Some of them are still just paper maps, haven't been digitized. Some of them have just been scanned into PDFs, and that's So that's one of the issues we are pushing here at ICLR, and others are saying, we need modern flood maps. And
this is a really good segue for my next guest, who's sitting across from me right now. My colleague, Roberto Rocha, who's a data journalist here at CBC Montreal, and I just wanted Roberto to come by for a minute to talk about something that he is working on, something that's going to be live sometime in the next couple of days. You are working on maps. Tell me what exactly we're going to find there.
Well, I do have the most current flood maps for for all Quebec, looking at the Montreal area. But like your guest said, it's a mishmash, right? Some of them are as up to date as they can. Some of them are archived flood maps that are no longer reliable. They can't be used for modern analysis, and we just don't have up to date information for critical areas like the Prairies River, which along Pierrefonds, which is what flooded, and those are the highest risk flood zones in Montreal. So that makes the job hard to find out, okay, who really is in a flood risk zone? Right now we don't know.
When this is live at cbc.ca, people are going to be able to go on and see one of 3 different scenarios, right?
Yeah, what we want to compare is what are the most official, up-to-date flood risk zones, and how far did the water come in this flood that we're living through now.
Right. So you have the 100-year flood zone, right? And that's an area where we expect flooding, we think, every 100 years or so.
Yeah, it's a best guess about the likelihood of a major flood that would happen once every 100 years.
You're also going to have a 20-year map?
Yeah, because all those simulations have these two. These are quite arbitrary, but they're sort of agreed upon standards. Like, what is the 20-year flood zone, or how likely it is to flood once every 20 years, and the 100-year flood zone, right? So yeah, we're trying to get our hands on the most up-to-date projections for these 2 types of zones.
And then you're going to have one more category, and that's where we actually have seen flooding in the last several days.
Yeah,
or so, right?
and that's from very recent satellite readings that the government has shared.
I know you like certainty and data. Let me ask you one last question where I think there's a degree of uncertainty. When are we going to be able to see this at cbc.ca?
We're working on getting the most up-to-date maps here, the most up-to-date answers. So hopefully this week, as soon as possible.
Roberto, thanks for coming by.
Sure.
My colleagues, Roberto Rocha here from CBC Montreal, data journalist for CBC here in Montreal. Glenn McGillivray, we're going to get back to our phone calls here, if that is all right with you. Let's go to Doug, who's calling from here in Montreal. Hi, Doug.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine, yourself?
All right. What did you want to talk about?
Yes, well, I just want to widen the discussion a little bit. First, yes, I quite agree we should be having this discussion. It's important for municipalities and for people who have property. I have a cottage in the Quebec City region near Saint-Augustin-de-Desmaures, which is on the floodplain, but it's the tidal floodplain, actually. And with global warming apparently coming, I am concerned about my cottage. In March, I had an inch of water on my floor, the first time in 30 years, so I'm kind of sensitized to the question. My point is about responsibility, and I think municipalities and the citizens should have a joint economic responsibility. So that's my main point.
What would that look like?
Well, sharing of costs. Like I'd be happy to put my cottage up higher on stilts, for example. I think that's a workable solution in my case, and I'm happy to pay a third or maybe even half of the cost of that.
As long as the government sort of compensates for the rest of that.
Yes, exactly. There's another aspect. The government provides tide tables, in my case, but they don't really anticipate they'll give what's called a storm surge warning when the winds are from the east or northeast. But for the moment, they're not really giving good information about what the actual height of the tide is going to be when the wind is from the northeast. So I think that wouldn't cost much, I think, for the government to develop a better indication of the actual tide height.
So that people could be at least better prepared. Listen, all right, well, thanks for the call. Good to speak with you. That's Doug in Montreal. The phone number is 514-597-4500, and toll-free, it's 1-877-597-4500. Glenn McGillivray, I was mentioning to you that we were going to speak with someone in Nova Scotia who had experienced flooding and then had her home bought out by the province there. And we're going to go now to Anna May Muse, who is from Cape Breton in Nova Scotia. Saw some pretty bad flooding last year there. It affected several homes in Sydney, and then the provincial government decided that it was going to buy out, I believe it's 17 of those homes. And Anna May Muse in Sydney is one of the people who I think is in the process of being bought out and joins me now on the line. Hi there, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, thank you so much for coming on. Tell me, how badly was your home flooded in that flood last year on Thanksgiving Day?
Well, the basement was completely flooded. I live on a one-story home, and the water level came halfway up my refrigerator in the kitchen. So I guess that would be the best measure to give you. Probably about 12 to 14 feet.
Oh, my. Okay. I'm so sorry to hear that. Now, at some point before the buyout, obviously someone was saying to someone else, it is not a good idea to go back there. So was that you saying to the government, look, I don't want to go back? Or was it the government saying to you, we don't want you to go back?
At that time, it was a few days after the flood, we had EMO people come in and fire people and officials from the city, and they declared that the home was not habitable. And there were 17 homes declared not habitable. So, well, of course you couldn't live in it. And as the water levels receded, the mold moved in and the hardwood floors were all rippled and buckled, and my bottom cupboards and everything below that water level was ruined. And then it didn't take long for the mold to start crawling right up the walls.
Okay,
so you couldn't live in there. No way.
So there was really no question about rebuilding, cleaning up, or going to another place. It sounds like that decision was pretty clear.
Pretty clear, and they decided that once the water breached the main level of a home, that you couldn't live there. And in fact, one of my neighbors, it just about breached the upstairs in a two-story home. So it was pretty devastating for everybody. I have such empathy for you people in Quebec. I know how horrible this is for you.
For you, I wonder whether the buyout offer, did that sort of just completely satisfy you, or were you left with mixed feelings about it?
Well, the way the government in Nova Scotia did it, there were two separate issues. There was the cost of your home, and all of the homes were appraised, and we were given what was considered fair market value. I'm satisfied with what I got for my home. There are others of the 17 who were not satisfied with the appraisal, and in which case the government offered the people another appraisal. Go get your home appraised privately, and they would pay for it, and they gave the higher of the two appraisals. So in that regard, I'm quite satisfied. The other side of the issue was contents in the home. Now, I lived in that home for 30 years, so you can imagine the contents I had. And they came up with a list. They called it a chattel list. And when I first saw the list, I thought, oh, my gosh, this is what someone on social assistance would get. And I got no argument on that. It was just bare bones allotment. I think I was allowed $500 for a fridge, but I had paid $2,200 for my fridge. Mm-hmm. The worst part for me was that I had invested $80,000 in my home 4 years ago. So that money's gone out the window, isn't it? Because I don't have a home and I don't have the $80,000. So what they allowed for contents, they didn't allow for any extras other than basic living. So all my patio furniture and all the summer lawn stuff, all of the Christmas decorations, all the china and dishes and everything that I had stored in the basement, that was not compensated for.
Well, it sounds like you're describing everything that we get over the years that really makes our house our house. I wonder how emotional then was the process of leaving?
Oh, it was just terrible. It was terrible. I went into a depression, but if there's any piece of advice I can give people, it's to get help, even to have someone to shoulder to cry on. It was helpful. I saw a counselor for 4 months. It's extremely emotional, and it took time, and that's the worst of it. Like, they moved as fast as they could. As a government, I think the feds and the province did as much as they could for us, as fast as they could for us, but it still took time. And every day that I didn't know what was going to happen to me, being homeless is not a nice place to be, and not knowing if the house was going to be condemned for a little while, and then wondering how much am I going to get for it, how am I going to move on, where am I going to live. These are all such extreme stressors. It was terrible, and it's going to be terrible for you people up there until you can get yourself settled.
Anna Mae Muse, thank you so much for coming on and telling me a little bit about your situation, and we wish you all the best there.
Well, thank you for having me, and the people in Montreal, you're in my prayers.
That's Anna Mae Muse. She lives in Sydney, in Nova Scotia, talking about the flooding that she experienced there and the buyout that she got from the provincial government there. Glenn McGillivray, she talks about the emotional aspect, also talks about the financial aspect. So fair market value, I mean, we were saying that's not that hard to assess and to figure out, but I mean, you are going to have people who are saying, you are not giving me enough for this house, right?
Right. I mean, I've read historical documents that people weren't all that happy in '54 in Toronto when they bought out people after Hazel. Let's face it. I mean, when people are in this situation, they're not going to be happy.
What happened after Hurricane Hazel?
Well, in Hurricane Hazel in the Toronto area, 81 people were killed in the floods, and the province of Ontario came in. They bought out just over 200 homeowners in areas around Toronto and converted their neighborhoods into parkland, public parkland that was basically designed to flood. And these places now do flood. They did actually last week in the rains that we got Thursday, Friday. And there's no private property is damaged and nobody's killed. And this is kind of a case study of how to run a good buyout program in Canada.
So what happened in Cape Breton, it sounds like there was a buyout, but only because those homes were deemed uninhabitable.
Not only were they deemed uninhabitable, but the province has deemed that area a no-build zone. So they've bought out the 17 homeowners, and there will be no reconstruction in place of those homes. You were mentioning other examples earlier, I think in Alberta, of situations where you say there's a voluntary buyout in place. In those situations, you tend not to see that many takers? No, I mean, they had about a third or a quarter of people take the government up on the offer there, and so it just doesn't work when that happens. You still have risk, and the flow of water is affected because you still are going to have homes in the floodplain, so it doesn't do the trick. We're going to go back to our phone lines now. We have about 7 minutes left in the program, 7 minutes left with Glenn McGillivray. We're talking about floodplains and what to do about them and what to do on them, really. Let's go to Samira, who's calling from Montreal. Hi, Samira.
Hi.
So what do you think?
So what I think is one thing to look at is to blame insurance companies in this story and promoters who, they should be responsibilized. And when people buy a home, you look at the environment that they live in, and it should be able to cover the cost of your environment. If people don't want to leave or don't want to buy out their places, that there should be better emergency plans in place that, if they are in a floodplain area. I agree that we should copy the model in Ontario and just say we can't build in these places. Because the thing is, we have a great gift to humanity is to be able to adapt. And if we don't mobilize ourselves and face the problems that that we have now, we're gonna live with the consequences of it, and we already are. So,
tell me a little bit about how you think the insurance companies are responsible, because they will give coverage to people. Is that it?
Well, they won't cover people whose homes have been flooded. I mean, this is ridiculous. You have a waterfront property. I mean, they should help cover this. This is like big corporations that, don't care. And we as taxpayers have to pay for that. And people are paying a lot of money for insurance every month just to have their home insured. This is ridiculous.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that they are to blame because they won't cover in some cases. All right, got it.
Yeah, and it should be included in the insurance plan. I mean, people pay a lot of money for insurance, and it should be, if it's going to be a private society, economy, then they should be socially conscious. Promoters shouldn't be allowed to build in places that can flood. I mean, if you look at the ice caps that are melting, water is going to rise. And
So, Samara, tell you what, let me address your question to Glenn McGillivray. He's the managing director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. And Mr. McGillivray, I'll point out here, you say the industry is, the institute rather, is funded by the insurance industry. So you hear Samira saying, well, the industry is to blame for not helping people out in these situations. I'll get you to respond to that.
Well, first of all, you're not paying for flood insurance in Canada, so you do not get that coverage. It has not been available in Canada until about a year and a half ago. The flooding in southern Alberta in 2013 really kind of made some big changes in Canada, and so now about 15 to 20 companies are offering overland flood insurance, and more companies are offering it almost on a weekly basis. We're not quite there yet. It's in its early stages. But you're not paying for that coverage, and therefore you do not get it. And it has never been available in Canada until the last year and a half.
But if I follow the logical extension of everything you've been saying, then shouldn't they not offer that coverage? Shouldn't they instead say, you are not living in a place that we feel good about insuring?
Well,
to certain people who are in high-risk areas.
If you're not offering flood insurance, then you're not going to tell somebody not to live next to a river because you're not indemnifying them for that. One of the problems and challenges of offering flood insurance is that only people that live next to a river would buy it, and therefore it would be an unviable product. The fact is that all Canadians that own a home have a risk of that home burning down in a fire, and therefore you are spreading the risk right across the country. Flood, on the other hand, riverine flooding anyway is different because people only located next to a river would buy it. And so there are things that you have to do to ensure that the product is viable. And one of the things that we're trying to get across to people is that pretty much everybody is at risk of flood in Canada. You do not have to live next to a river. You can also be at risk due to heavy rainfall events like we've seen in places like Toronto over the last years.
And that would be covered by the same overland water kind of policy? Okay.
Right, or sewer backup coverage, either one of the two.
Okay.
But as far as the public policy decisions to allow the construction, that is a government issue. That is not an insurance industry issue. People give way too much power to insurance companies to make these decisions. They have really no say at all in land use planning.
So if it's a government issue, then why would you say it is that we keep saying? I mean, because your column talks about this vicious cycle. Why do we see governments over and over again allowing the development and the construction in these areas?
Because the level of government that allows the construction, usually the local government, is not the one left holding the bag when the disaster comes. And so they get to say yes to a new development. They reap in the property tax and the other benefits that come with it. But then when the disaster comes, it is the province that steps in with disaster assistance, and the province then goes to the federal government for partial reimbursement. And so I personally believe that if the municipalities at least held some of the risk, if they had at least some skin in the game, they would think twice about making these decisions, but they don't have a lot of skin in the game.
Glenn McGillivray, I want to go to one last call here, and that call is from Ellen. Hi, Ellen.
Hi.
Can't give you too much time, but did want to hear what you have to say.
I'll be quite quick.
Okay.
I am a graduate of the McGill School of Urban Planning. And I've always been very concerned about people being allowed by the local governments to build in floodplains. And that is something that ought to be, and it isn't often enough, covered by zoning changes, so that those areas can be zoned as areas for parkland, which we don't have enough of in Montreal, and for pleasures, because they're not going to be flooded all the time, just occasionally. And the present people, perhaps, I feel terribly sorry for them because they love their homes. But gradually, perhaps there could be a program for buyout over a period of 5 or 8 years so that nobody's rushed. There could be slow buyouts at fair market value.
Ellen, I'm going to jump in. I got to let you go, but thanks so much. Glenn McGillivray, I'll give you a few seconds. I'm guessing you'd think a lot of that was pretty sound thinking.
I think so. I mean, the whole thing about moving over to parkland absolutely makes sense. The very first caller today said something about everybody should be able to enjoy the water, not just a select few. That makes a lot of sense as well. And buyout spread over a period of time, something to think about.
Glenn McGillivray, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Glenn McGillivray is the managing director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, which is a research arm of the University of Western Ontario. Thanks, everybody, for your calls today. Deborah Arvik is here right now. She's your anchor on CBC Montreal News. Hi there, Deborah.
Hi,